First of all, let's talk to the Slough MP, Labour's Tan Desi, who is the Shadow Rail Minister. Morning, Tan.
Good morning, Andrew.
Do you support the rail workers listening to us now who are taking action tomorrow?
The Labour Party, my good self, we support any workers' right to strike. That is a fundamental democratic right. We don't live in Russia. We don't live in a tin pot dictatorship. It is the fundamental right of anybody to strike. But look, nobody wants this strike. Nor me, nor the Labour Party. The workers themselves don't want it, and the government should not want it either.
Sure they don't. So therefore, why is it happening?
No, I don't think that's the case, Andrew. I think the government has been virtually gunning for a strike because they have taken a very lackluster response to this in terms of because they'd been wanting to distract from Partygate and Boris Johnson's own lying and law breaking. Instead of acting in the public interest, they've been playing political games. They've been spoiling for a fight with the rail unions, and they have not been negotiating. What's happened is since March, they have not even sat down with the unions to thrash out a deal. If we contrast that with what's been going on in Wales, Transport for Wales have agreed a deal. So they've come to a compromise. And what we've been calling on the government for now several months is to sit down with the unions because of the huge disruption.
Right. The government's standpoint this morning, and there's a government minister on the television right now saying this, is this: if they give awards to rail workers that are above inflation, they'll never bring inflation under control. And from an economic standpoint, that makes sense.
Well, look, I think this thing has to be negotiated in the round. This is not just about the scales of pay. This is about cuts to maintenance and safety checks, as the unions have been talking. That it's about cuts to rail services. There have already been about 19,000 cuts to rail services. And this is also about making sure that there are no ticket office closures. I think that was another exclusive by the Times. But what has also come to light is that the government has been stopping the train operating companies by tying their hands, by giving them no mandate in talks. So they won't, according to whistleblowers, the ministers won't actually let train firms negotiate the pay deal with the RMT unions.
Yes, I mean, you mentioned one or two other issues, and I'm sure they're important, but actually it is for many people who are walking out of work tomorrow about pay. Do you think rail workers need a pay rise?
Well, look, I think rail workers have done an incredible job, as have many others. They, remember, during the pandemic, they were very much part of the key workers. They kept our railways running, and they deserve a decent pay. They deserve decent terms and conditions.
What would decent pay look like? How big a pay rise should they get?
Well, look, that's not for me to determine as a Shadow Rail Minister. That is part of a collective bargaining agreement wherein pay, terms and conditions, and the conditions which the unions want is that there are no compulsory redundancies, because at the moment thousands of redundancies are planned as well. So what the unions, as well as many within the rail industry, don't want, they do not want a managed decline under this government. So it is incredibly important the government, even at this last hour, actually come and sit down at the table with the unions and work this out, because this is going to cause a lot of heartache, a lot of inconvenience for my Slough constituents as well as people across our country.
And yet you won't condemn it. I mean, you're sort of, as all other Labour politicians are, largely speaking, dancing on the head of a pin here. You want to say you have the right to strike, but you don't want to say you support this strike action. You want to say that rail workers, of course, deserve a pay rise, but you don't want to say how much. Why is it all so tricky? Just tell us what you think.
Andrew, it's not tricky. That's our strong, firm position that has been there for weeks, because that's what the reality is. The reality is everybody has a right to strike if they so wish. However, we do not want to strike. Nobody wants to strike. That's why it's incredibly important that rather than political posturing, as has been done by the government, that we actually have a negotiated settlement. That is what is in the best interest. And for the government to blame the Labour Party for these strikes is absolutely laughable. They've been in charge for the last 12 years. They've been in charge in terms of these negotiations for the last couple of years. What the unions and others have been saying is that many of their members have not had a pay rise for 2 to 3 years. So they want that settlement negotiated. But instead, the likes of Grant Shapps, Boris Johnson, they've been sitting on it, and I think they're getting into their comfort zone.
I mean, it's quite hard. You must accept it's quite difficult for you this week to be on the side of both people who work on the railways who are taking strike action and the commuters in your constituency who will be inconvenienced by that strike action. You can't be on both sides.
No, I think the Labour Party is very much on the side of the hard-working British public, which includes, by the way, rail workers, Andrew. And I think many of my constituents, including many in the country, will be absolutely flabbergasted that we have a failure of government leadership. We have a failure of being able to negotiate, and that is a real travesty in this matter, and that they should have been sitting down with those rail workers to work out a compromise solution.
Okay, well, we'll see whether people listening agree with you or not. We'll open the lines on that in just a sec. Tam, while I've got you, this was the sort of the talk of the Labour movement last week, so I'm just interested to see what you say. Is Sir Keir Starmer, your leader, boring?
Well, I think the word that you're looking for, Andrew, is serious. The individual that we've got in charge is somebody who's serious. He is on top of his detail. Unlike Boris Johnson, he cares about honesty and integrity. Unlike Boris Johnson, I think that's why you'd rather have somebody in charge. We don't need a stand-up comedian. What we need is somebody who is going to give our country through these difficult times when we want to deal with the cost of living crisis, when we want to deal with the international crisis as a result of Russian aggression. If I wanted a stand-up comedian, I would have gone to the Apollo Theatre. I don't want to be going into Parliament to be looking at a joker or a comedian. I think the British public will gradually realise that what we need is somebody who is fully on top of his detail and who will provide leadership through these difficult times for our country.
Always enjoy talking to you. Thank you very much indeed, Tan, for coming on. Tan Desi is the Slough MP and Shadow Rail Minister.